In the Buddha's Eightfold Path, right effort plays a key role. Right effort has 4 different parts. In my last video, I dealt with the first part of right effort. Now, these are not in any particular order, really. I mean, there's a traditional order to them, but you can go in any order. So don't worry about that. I'll leave a link to that video down below in the notes if you haven't seen it, but you can see this video just as well without it. So in any event, the first of these efforts was the effort to restrain. The second of these efforts, the second aspect of right effort, is the effort to what's said give up, the effort of giving up. Now, what is this effort? In the Buddha gives various different descriptions of right effort in the suttas, a couple of major ones. In the longer description, this is what he says about the effort to give up. It's when a mendicant doesn't tolerate a sensual, malicious, or cruel thought that's arisen, but gives it up, gets rid of it, eliminates it, and obliterates it. They don't tolerate any bad, unskillful qualities that have arisen, but give them up, get rid of them, eliminate them, and obliterate them. This is called the effort to give up. Now, no further explanation of this particular aspect of effort is given in this sutta. And so what we're left with is really, at least on its face, an extremely difficult practice. How do we approach such a practice? Well, what I want to do in today's video is to give us some potential clues about such approaches. I'm going to go through 3 ways we can approach this. First, involving mindfulness itself, which is going to be a baseline here. Second, involving how we deal with greed. And third, how we may deal with ill will. That said, of course, there are going to be many, many ways to approach these topics. We could even say that the Dharma itself, all of the Dharma, all of the Buddha's teachings, are towards ends of how we achieve this giving up. To begin with, this practice of giving up requires mindfulness. It requires us to be mindful of when such states as these, such states that the Buddha mentions here, have arisen in the mind. Ordinarily, of course, these states do arise in the mind, but we're not aware of them as such. Of course, we know that we have thoughts that are hate-filled or cruel or greedy or whatever it might be, but we don't really see them as unskillful. We don't see them as problematic. For the most part, we tend to be simply driven by them, carried away by them, carried off by them. They simply become who we are and how we act. And when that happens, we're not being mindful. We're being mindless in a Buddhist sense. There's a key difference between having a thought, let's say, of cruelty arising in the mind and being aware of it as a thought of cruelty and as an unskillful thought, and the more ordinary example of simply having a thought of cruelty arise in the mind and not being aware of it in those terms. With that mindfulness, then, that mindfulness of these thoughts having arisen in the mind, can and should come the accompanying thought of giving them up. That these are unskillful thoughts, that these are thoughts that tend towards suffering in ourselves and others, and so therefore they are thoughts that we should contemplate giving up, thoughts that are not good for us. And that leads us towards the second part here, which are, what are the techniques? What are some techniques that we can use to give such thoughts up? And again, I can only touch on a few such techniques today to give us some kind of an illustration of what we might be considering. So second, once we've gotten that mindfulness, once that mindfulness is established, we notice that a greedy thought arises in the mind. How can we deal with that? Well, the Buddha gives us a number of different options. One of these, perhaps his most famous, or one of the most famous, is a particular option that he discusses in his sutta on mindfulness, on the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And this is known as a foulness practice, which is, it sounds quite extreme, it sounds a little bit sort of off-putting, And perhaps it is, but it's one that we can modify a little bit, I think. In the Sutta on Mindfulness, this is a practice about foulness of the body in particular. It's a contemplation that we do where we consider the internal organs, the bodily liquids, and so on, in a way that's meant to make us less greedy, less attached to our own bodies, less attached to physical bodies in general. We may know that the Buddha usually gave these kinds of talks to monastics. In his day, they probably would have largely been young monastics. Young monastics are liable to be particularly attached to bodies, their own and others. And so a practice such as one of foulness of the body is meant to make us relax around that kind of greed. Now, we ourselves may not be interested particularly in a body practice. That may depend on the case. But what I would suggest, at least, is that we modify this and consider it a sort of a practice of the difficulties and unpleasant aspects and unbeautiful aspects of possessions in general. My wife and I recently moved out of an apartment that we had owned for many years. And when we were doing that, one of the things we had to confront was our own past greed. And an apartment filled with, for want of a better description, junk. Stuff we didn't need anymore. Some of it, of course, we could give away, and that was very gratifying. It was gratifying to give things to people who could use them and would want them. But after having done so, there was still an enormous amount of junk, of stuff that nobody wanted, or nobody that we could find wanted. So we had to get rid of it all. And I think that kind of awareness of the junky quality of what we own is something that we can learn from. It's an insight that we can take. When we look around, of course, everything that we've bought, we bought for a reason, presumably, because we liked it. We thought it was beautiful or special or important. And always there's going to be things that we actually need, and I'm not denying that. But even so, there's a lot of junk. And things, meanwhile, need to be repaired, they fall apart, they break, they rust. It's all things that eventually are going to end up one way or another in the junk pile. So this is the downside, or one of the downsides, of possessions. They need to be attended to, and eventually they're going to need to be dealt with and discarded and put somewhere because we're no longer going to need them. Perhaps you've dealt with aging parents who have to get rid of a bunch of stuff in their lives. What are they going to do with it all? So our second effort, this effort to give up, is indeed an effort towards a more minimalist lifestyle. Now, I'm not counseling us to necessarily become monastics. I'm certainly not a monastic and need a certain amount of stuff around me and have my books and so on. I'm not a monastic. I have a full lifestyle. But I think these practices of tending towards minimalism, of learning to see the downsides of possessions, are indeed an essential aspect of a Buddhist mindset. We have, local to us, a swap shop where people come and swap things that they don't need anymore. If there's something that you have that is just sitting around and gathering dust, and it's still in decent condition, you bring it to the swap shop, and if it's any good, oftentimes it'll walk out of the swap shop even before you've set it down on the floor. And this is the kind of thing that I think we can all indeed learn from. And if we don't have a swap shop local to us, perhaps we can consider setting one up. So those are some practices we can consider for giving up greed. But what about giving up ill will? Well, in the passage I read, the Buddha talks about malice and cruelty in particular. These I'll take as examples of ill will, or at least particularly strong examples of ill will. The wish to be malicious or cruel to somebody. So how do we deal with such thoughts? Again, there are various options we have in the suttas. One of these involves the practice of loving kindness, or metta. Now, how can we approach a practice of loving kindness? There's one very famous example of a practice which I think is very worth going through. We begin by considering somebody who's very important in our lives, somebody towards whom we have a lot of kindness. Perhaps this is a mentor, somebody who's done us a great good. Maybe it's a teacher or someone like that. We consider them, hold them in our minds, perhaps during formal meditation, but we could do this at any time. And we consider them in front of us and think to ourselves, wish to ourselves, that they experience happiness. May they be happy. May they be healthy. May they be safe. May they have wellness, good lives. We can think of any number of such beneficial characters that we wish that they would have. And this kind of kindness that we generate towards them, that we feel naturally towards them, we can then extend towards somebody who is perhaps a good friend of ours. So we switch from a benefactor to a good friend. And we again wish them health and happiness and safety, well-being. We wish them an easy life. And then we, maintaining that attitude of kindness and friendliness towards them, we turn towards what's known as a neutral person, somebody perhaps whose name we don't even know, someone we may see passing us now and then on the street, or perhaps serving us in a restaurant, or checking us out in the grocery store, something like that, a person who comes up in our lives now and then, but who we don't know very well. And we we make an effort to retain that same sense of friendliness towards them, thinking, may they be happy and healthy, may they be safe, may they have easy lives, may they be well. Then maintaining, or at least attempting to maintain, that same sense of happiness and kindness, we turn to somebody who is somewhat difficult to us, somewhat difficult in our lives. And this is where the practice becomes, I think, more difficult, more effort-filled for us. It may not even be possible for us to maintain the same sense of friendliness. But if we can at least consider this difficult person, perhaps not with friendliness, but at least with a neutral mind, that at least we're making some progress. We're no longer holding them with ill will, but simply holding them the way one would hold a neutral person, simply thinking of them as another person on the street. Then we're making some progress towards giving up ill will, towards giving up anger and cruelty. Then perhaps we can move towards a state of mind that encompasses all beings. We can wish all beings that they be healthy and happy and safe, that they have easy lives. This is a way that we can practice loving kindness in a way that can counteract some of our ordinary tendencies towards ill will. This practice in general is one that's actually suggested by the 5th century Buddhist scholar Buddhaghosa in his great text, the Visuddhimagga. He actually suggests that we begin with ourselves. We begin by wishing well-being, wishing happiness and safety and health to ourselves first. However, I shy back a little bit from that particular instruction, both because he himself realized that it was something of an issue, because the Buddha didn't start wishing himself that way, and indeed didn't extend loving kindness towards any particular beings at all, but also because I think some of us find it difficult to wish ourselves well to begin with. It takes effort to wish ourselves well, at least for some of us, myself included. If you're not in that category and can generate enthusiastic kindness towards yourself, then by all means begin the practice with yourself. Now, Buddhaghosa actually suggests a range of practices to counteract anger and hatred and ill will. Another practice he suggests is to consider the downsides. Consider how acting out on anger or cruelty is going to make you look in the eyes of your neighbors. Consider how it's going to make you look bad. Consider how it can be dangerous to you in the eyes of the law. If for no other reason, it's going to make your life more difficult. And of course, this is only a start of the practices that we might consider to give up these unskillful states. If you know of other ones that you find particularly useful, by all means leave them down in the notes, or I should say in your comments below the notes. If you're getting something out of these videos, I should say, before I even go there, if you, the next video on this series is going to be the third of these efforts, and when that video is ready, I will leave a link to it up here on the screen, and meanwhile I have a different video as well that YouTube will suggest to you in case you want to see another one. If you're getting something out of these videos, consider taking a look at my Patreon page, which is linked down below and in the notes, and see if you want to help support the channel and the work that we're all doing here together. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next video, and meanwhile, all of you, be well.